Maxine Waters walked into the hearing ready to silence Kash Patel and protect what documents later claimed was a hidden network of family-linked shell companies and diverted housing funds. But minutes later, Patel exposed the alleged $27 million paper trail, triggered live federal warrants, and turned her attempt to bury the truth into the most explosive congressional collapse of the year, with millions of Americans watching in stunned silence. The hearing room inside the U.S. Capitol was already buzzing before anyone took the microphone. This wasn't a campaign rally or a late-night TV debate. It was a congressional oversight session, broadcast live to millions of Americans, meant to question federal leadership and review government accountability. But from the very first minute, it was clear this wasn't going to be routine. The chamber was packed tighter than usual. Staffers hugged the walls. Reporters leaned forward like they could smell a headline. And at the center of it all, Maxine Waters sat angled toward Kash Patel like she'd decided the verdict before he even opened his mouth. Waters didn't waste time. She didn't ease into her attack. The moment Patel finished adjusting his microphone, she leaned forward and fired first. "Mr. Patel," she said, sharp and loud enough to cut through the air, "you're nothing more than a Trump puppet." It wasn't a question. It was a stamp. "Let's stop pretending this is neutral oversight," she snapped. "You weren't brought here to protect the public. You were brought here to protect Donald Trump and do his dirty work." A few heads turned. Some staffers froze mid-step. Waters kept going, stacking the accusation higher. "You walk into this chamber wearing a federal badge, but everyone knows whose orders you follow. You don't investigate corruption. You manufacture enemies." The words weren't aimed at Patel's arguments. They were aimed at his identity, his legitimacy, his right to even sit at that table. Patel didn't respond right away. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make her last sentence hang in the air. Then he leaned toward the microphone, his voice low but steady. "Madam Congresswoman," he said calmly, "I didn't come here to trade slogans with you." Waters scoffed loudly. "Of course you didn't," she shot back. "You came here with a script, a camera crew, and a political agenda." Patel finally looked directly at her. "What I came here with," he replied, "is evidence, and evidence doesn't care who you insult." The chairman tried to pull the hearing back onto safer ground. He cleared his throat and tapped the desk. "Let's refocus on the purpose of today's session," he said, clearly hoping to cool the temperature. Patel raised one hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough to signal he wasn't done. "Mr. Chairman," he said, "before we move forward, I formally request to enter Exhibits A, B, and C into the official record." That single sentence changed the energy in the room. This wasn't commentary anymore. This was procedure. This was documentation. Waters immediately cut in. "This is a circus," she said sharply. "You're trying to hijack this hearing with paperwork and theatrics." Patel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the chairman. "This isn't theater," he said. "This is the foundation." Waters slammed her hand lightly on the desk. "Foundation of what?" she demanded. "Another fake investigation? Another headline designed to smear me?" Patel finally turned his head toward her again. "If this were a smear," he said evenly, "I'd be yelling. I'd be speculating. I'd be throwing labels the way you just did." He paused, then delivered the line that made several people in the room shift in their seats. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to read the trail." The words landed hard because they sounded final, not emotional, not reactive. Then Patel reached for the binder slowly, not like someone rushing to make a point, but like someone opening a case file that had already been decided by the evidence inside. He flipped it open and nodded to the technician. Instantly, the large screen behind the committee table lit up, mirroring the first page. Rows of numbers appeared, clean and organized, with highlighted lines running across the screen. "Line by line," Patel said evenly, tapping the page with his finger. Dollar by dollar. The room leaned forward almost in unison. This wasn't a speech anymore. It was a ledger being read out loud. Patel didn't rush. He let the numbers sit long enough for people to actually process them, not just hear them. Let's start with a company called Westbridge Consulting, Patel continued. No full-time employees, no registered office location, no record of active business operations. He paused and then dropped the figure. Yet this company received more than $9 million in federal housing development grants. A low gasp rolled through the chamber. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Patel pointed at the screen. These funds were approved during the same period when amendments were introduced expanding eligibility requirements for this exact grant program. He turned his head slightly toward Waters. Those amendments were sponsored by you. A few members shifted in their seats. Staffers exchanged quick looks. This was no longer abstract. Names were being connected to numbers in real time. Waters leaned forward, her voice snapping back across the table. This is a smear campaign, she said sharply. You're cherry-picking data and twisting timelines to build a fake narrative. Patel didn't raise his voice. He didn't even change his tone. Numbers don't smear, he replied calmly. They speak. He flipped the page and pointed to another highlighted section. Westbridge Consulting is controlled by your nephew, according to the ownership filings shown on this screen. The room went quiet again, heavier this time. Patel continued without slowing down. While federal funds were flowing in, legislative changes were being pushed through. That timing isn't political rhetoric. It's documented. He closed the binder just enough to let the cover rest flat on the table, then looked up at the committee. And let me be clear, he said, his voice steady but firm. This is only the first file. The sentence hung in the air longer than anything else he'd said. People didn't whisper. They didn't move. They just stared at the screen, still glowing with numbers and names. Patel didn't give the room time to breathe. He flipped the binder forward, the thick pages sliding with a soft but unmistakable sound, and the screen behind him refreshed again. Westbridge wasn't the end of the trail, he said calmly. It was the first step. A new chart appeared, this one showing arrows instead of simple rows. Meet Golden State Advisors, Patel continued. Another company. No staff, no office, no real services. But it received nearly $500,000 directly from Westbridge. He tapped the screen, where the arrow connected the two entities. This is what we call a hop. Money doesn't stop. It moves. Several committee members leaned closer, squinting at the timeline as if they could slow it down just by staring harder. Waters jumped in, trying to regain control of the narrative. You sit there talking about charts while ignoring the real issue, she said sharply. My entire career has been about fighting for underserved communities, affordable housing, economic justice. You're twisting programs meant to help struggling families into some fantasy scandal. A few people in the gallery nodded. It was familiar language, powerful language. Patel didn't argue the sentiment. He simply turned it back on her. Every dollar you're talking about, he said evenly, was meant for housing, for families, for neighborhoods that were promised relief. He paused and pointed back to the screen. Now look where it landed. The words weren't loud, but they hit harder because they were paired with numbers, dates, and arrows that told their own story. Patel advanced to the next page and slowed down on purpose. Here's a transfer from Westbridge to Golden State, he said, zooming in on a highlighted line. The screen enlarged a scanned document. And here's the memo line attached to it. He let the room read it for a second before speaking again. It says, hold for secondary distribution. That's not random language. That's instruction. A ripple moved through the chamber. Patel tapped the paper copy on the desk. Someone didn't just move money. Someone told it where to go next. Waters opened her mouth to interrupt, then hesitated, as if choosing her words more carefully now. "You don't know who wrote that," she said, but the edge in her voice had softened. Patel nodded slightly. "You're right. That's why we follow the trail forward." He turned another page. "After Golden State received the funds, the money didn't sit there," he continued. "It was split again. Smaller transfers, different accounts, different names, same network." The arrows on the screen multiplied, spreading outward like branches. "This isn't community investment," Patel said quietly. "This is layering." Waters tried to speak again, but this time Patel didn't pause for her. He stayed on pace, steady and controlled, like he knew momentum mattered. "And when you add these secondary transfers to what we already showed with Westbridge," he said, looking directly at the committee, "the total doesn't stop at 9 million. He let the silence stretch. "It doesn't stop at 12. Then he dropped it. "It reaches $27 million. The room froze. Waters leaned back in her chair, lips pressed together, eyes locked on the screen. Even people who had been whispering to aides went quiet. The number wasn't just big. It was final. Patel turned the binder again, and this time the screen didn't show company names or arrows. It showed dates. Long rows of them, highlighted in different colors, stacked from top to bottom like a calendar that had been marked up by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. "These aren't just transactions," Patel said calmly. "They're timestamps." He pointed to the left column. "These are legislative actions, bills sponsored, amendments introduced, votes that expanded funding authority." Then he slid his finger to the right side of the screen. "And these are wire transfers, deposits into accounts connected to the same network." He paused and let the room absorb the side-by-side layout. "Now look at the spacing." Waters leaned forward immediately. "This is misleading," she said sharply. "Correlation is not causation. You're lining up dates and pretending it proves intent. That's not evidence. That's storytelling." A few members on her side nodded, grateful for a familiar defense. Patel didn't react emotionally. He simply zoomed the screen in. "We didn't pull 2 examples," he said evenly. "We ran 5 years of data." He tapped the top of the chart. 15 separate legislative actions you either sponsored or supported." He tapped the bottom. 15 transfers into entities tied to your family network." Then he drew an invisible line between the 2 columns. Every one of them occurred within 7 days. The room grew quiet again. But this time, it wasn't shock. It was discomfort. A congressman sitting 2 seats away from Waters cleared his throat and tried to step in. "Director Patel," he said, "this looks like speculation. Charts can be designed to tell any story you want." Patel nodded once, acknowledging the challenge. "That's why we didn't design it," he replied. "We pulled raw bank transaction logs, matched them against the public congressional calendar, and removed outliers that didn't meet time proximity thresholds." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't oversell it. He made it sound boring on purpose. No opinions, no assumptions, just time and money. That short explanation hit harder than a long defense because it sounded technical, clean, and hard to spin. Patel stepped back slightly from the screen and looked across the committee. "This is not coincidence," he said. "It's a pattern." Then he added the line that locked the room into place. "And patterns create flow." He pointed once more at the chart. "Federal funds move out. Shell entities receive them. Secondary accounts distribute them. That's not politics. That's a documented flow." He let the words sit, not rushing to fill the silence. Patel didn't turn another page this time. He closed the binder halfway, rested his palms on the cover, and looked up at the room instead of the screen. His voice dropped slightly, slower, heavier, like he was choosing each word on purpose. "What I'm about to say," he began, "is not theoretical. It's not a projection. It's not something planned for next week." The chamber quieted on instinct. Even Waters stopped moving. "It's happening as we speak." He paused just long enough for that sentence to sink in, then continued. "While this hearing has been underway, federal agents have been executing 3 search warrants connected to the financial network we've just discussed. One in Los Angeles, one in Inglewood, and one at a downtown financial services office tied directly to the flow of these funds." The reaction hit instantly. Voices erupted from the gallery. Reporters shot upright, phones already in their hands. The chairman slammed his gavel hard against the desk. "Order!" he shouted, but it barely cut through the noise. Waters slammed her palm on the table in front of her, eyes wide with anger. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "You are staging this for cameras. You're turning law enforcement into political theater." Patel didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look rattled. He waited until the gavel brought the room down a notch, then leaned back toward the microphone. "Mr. Chairman," Patel said calmly, "I formally request to enter the warrant authorizations and jurisdiction summaries into the record." The clerk hesitated for a beat, then nodded. The chairman looked down at the paperwork in front of him and cleared his throat. "The record will reflect," he said slowly, 3 federal warrants issued this morning by district judges in California, covering residential and commercial properties associated with the investigation. That sentence landed harder than any shout. It didn't sound dramatic. It sounded official, final, the kind of statement that can't be taken back. Waters shook her head sharply. "You think flashing paperwork makes this legitimate?" she fired back. "You're dragging families through the mud for a headline." Patel turned to face her directly. "These warrants were approved by federal judges," he said evenly. "Not pundits, not politicians, judges." He leaned slightly closer to the microphone. "They were signed after months of bank records, sworn testimony, and digital forensic analysis. This isn't theater. It's law enforcement." The room went quiet again. But this time it wasn't shock. It was tension, the kind that presses on your chest. Patel continued, steady and relentless. "As we speak, agents are securing documents, servers, hard drives, and financial ledgers. Every item will be catalogued, logged, and reviewed. And once that process is complete, this committee will receive the findings." Waters opened her mouth to interrupt, then closed it again, clearly choosing not to step in front of that momentum. Several members on both sides whispered urgently to their aides. Phones buzzed across the chamber like insects you couldn't swat away. Then it happened. A voice cut through the tension from the gallery. "Director Patel," a reporter shouted, ignoring the chairman's glare. "Are arrests coming?" The gavel slammed down again. "The gallery will remain silent," the chairman barked. Patel didn't answer it. He didn't need to. The silence itself became the answer people feared and waited for. Waters leaned back in her chair, jaw tight, eyes fixed forward. Then Waters didn't argue numbers again. She changed the battlefield. She leaned forward slowly, eyes locked on Patel, and spoke with a sharper edge. "Let's be honest about what you're doing," she said. "You're not here to protect taxpayers. You're here to destroy a black woman in power." The words hit the room like a flashbang. You could feel people freeze in their seats. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, adjusting focus, waiting for what came next. This wasn't policy anymore. This was identity. This was emotion. And everyone knew it was her strongest weapon. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Patel responded, and the contrast was jarring. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get defensive. He didn't even change his posture. "Truth doesn't care about narratives," he said quietly. "It doesn't care about politics, race, party, or reputation. It only cares about records." He reached into the binder again, this time pulling out a thinner stack of papers clipped together. "Let's talk about records," he added. Patel placed the documents on the table and signaled to the screen operator. The display changed to a scanned affidavit, official letterhead at the top, signature block at the bottom. "This is a sworn statement from a senior compliance officer at Central Union Bank," Patel said. He flagged repeated large deposits tied to the same shell network we just discussed. He reported suspicious activity. He documented irregular transfers. And he submitted formal alerts. Patel tapped the page. Those alerts were ignored. The room shifted again. Some lawmakers leaned forward. Others sat back, suddenly uncomfortable. Waters shook her head hard. "These so-called witnesses are paid off," she snapped. "You dig up people with grudges and turn them into headlines." Patel didn't hesitate. He didn't argue motive. He didn't debate character. He delivered one clean sentence that cut through everything. "Then challenge the paper," he said. "Not my voice." He pointed back to the screen. "These are sworn statements, signed, time-stamped, filed under penalty of perjury. You don't beat that with accusations, you beat it with proof." He flipped to the next page. "Here's the suspicious activity report log," Patel continued. "Dates, account numbers, transfer flags, each one tied to the same financial pattern we've already shown." He looked up at the committee. "This isn't interpretation. It's documentation." Waters opened her mouth to respond, then stopped herself. Her tone shifted, less aggressive, more defensive. "You're twisting this," she said. "You're framing everything to fit your story." Patel shook his head once. "This isn't my agenda," he replied calmly. "It's your record." The sentence landed hard. One of Waters' allies stared at the desk. Another rubbed his forehead. The gallery was silent again, not because of shock, but because no one knew what argument could erase a signed affidavit on a public screen. Waters leaned back in her chair, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed forward. Patel didn't turn another spreadsheet. Instead, he picked up the remote, and the screen behind him changed to a photograph. It showed a row of boarded-up apartment buildings, windows shattered, paint peeling, weeds climbing the walls. The room went quiet again. But this silence felt different. "This," Patel said slowly, "was a federally funded redevelopment site." He flipped to the next image, an empty dirt lot with a rusted fence, a faded sign promising a future community center. $3.2 million allocated, he continued, approved, released, and then gone. Another click. A cracked basketball court, grass pushing through the pavement, broken rims hanging crooked. $400,000 set aside for youth recreation, he added. Never delivered. The numbers weren't abstract anymore. They had faces. They had locations. They had damage you could see. Waters tried to regain control. "You know better than this," she said sharply. "Projects fail for many reasons. City delays, bureaucracy, contractors. You can't pin every broken building on one office." Patel turned slightly toward her, but kept his eyes on the screen. "Projects don't fail because money disappears into a cousin's account," he said flatly. The room reacted to that line with a low, uncomfortable murmur. Patel didn't wait for it to fade. He zoomed in on the binder image now mirrored on the screen. "Here's the grant agreement," he said, reading directly from it. Quote, "Funds will be used to provide safe housing units for low-income families within 18 months of release." He paused, then switched to the next document. "And here's the transfer receipt. Same month, same week. Funds redirected to a private entity tied to your family network." Patel let both documents sit side by side on the screen. Promise on one side. Transfer timestamp on the other. "This isn't a delay," he said quietly. "This is a detour." He moved to another image, an abandoned clinic building, with a banner still hanging from its grand opening announcement. $2 million approved for healthcare access, he continued, never opened its doors. Waters shifted in her chair, her voice losing some of its sharpness. You're exploiting photos to manipulate public opinion, she said. Patel nodded slightly. Public opinion isn't created by pictures, he replied. It's created by consequences. He gestured to the screen one last time. Families were promised housing. Kids were promised safe spaces. Seniors were promised care. And instead, money moved somewhere else. The chamber felt different now. It didn't feel like a committee room anymore. It felt like a courtroom without a judge. Lawmakers sat stiff in their seats. Reporters stopped typing and just watched. Even Waters' allies avoided looking at the screen too long. Patel lowered the remote and rested it on the table. These aren't political props, he said. They're the result of decisions. Patel didn't stop at the missing money. He flipped the binder to a section marked with colored tabs and nodded toward the screen. This time, instead of charts, emails and internal memos filled the display. Subject lines, timestamps, reply chains. What you've seen so far is the theft, Patel said evenly. What comes next is how it was protected. He pointed to the first message. In 2018, a senior compliance officer flagged repeated deposits tied to this same network. He warned that the transactions had no legitimate business purpose. Patel tapped the next document. Within 24 hours of sending that warning, he was reassigned to a different department. The investigation was closed. The room shifted again. This wasn't sloppy corruption anymore. This was coordination. Patel didn't let the moment fade. The reassignment wasn't random, he continued. It was approved by a board member with a long record of political donations connected to your campaigns. Waters shook her head immediately. You're connecting dots that don't belong together, she snapped. Patel barely reacted. He turned the page again. This isn't limited to banks, he said. In 2020, a federal housing oversight audit flagged irregular grant distributions in your district. The screen changed to a memo stamped with review markings. That audit never reached the public, Patel added. It was shelved. He highlighted the signature at the bottom. Signed off by a senior official who previously served as your policy advisor. A low wave of whispers moved through the chamber. Even members who had defended Waters earlier looked uneasy. Then, Patel did something different. He pulled out a slim folder from beneath the binder and held it up just long enough for the cameras to catch it. This is a cooperating witness statement, he said. New. Signed within the last 48 hours. The screen switched again, now showing a federal affidavit header. Patel read one short paragraph out loud. Quote, I was told directly that these accounts were protected and that raising further concerns would damage my career. He lowered the paper slightly. That's not rumor. That's sworn testimony. The room went silent in a heavier way than before. This wasn't speculation. This was someone inside the system admitting the shield existed. Waters leaned forward sharply. You're dragging innocent people into this, she said, her voice tight. Bank workers, agency staff. You're destroying lives to prop up your narrative. Patel met her eyes. Some of them will sit here, he replied calmly. Subpoenas have already been issued. He let that sit before adding, others have agreed to cooperate, and what you're seeing today is only a portion of what's been collected. He closed the folder and rested it on top of the binder. This is only a fraction of what's been secured. The chamber felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved in. Lawmakers whispered urgently to aides. Phones buzzed across the room again. Waters leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched, staring straight ahead. Then the chairman cleared his throat and leaned toward the microphone, his voice noticeably tighter than when the hearing began. Director Patel, he said, you have the floor for final remarks. Patel didn't rush. He straightened the binder, placed both hands on the table, and looked across the room one last time. "What you've seen today isn't noise," he said calmly. "It's structure, it's evidence, and it's the foundation of an active federal investigation." His tone wasn't emotional. It was controlled, deliberate, almost surgical. "This isn't about winning arguments. It's about accountability." Patel raised one finger slightly. "First, the paper trail," he said. "Charts that show where federal money moved and who received it." Then a second finger. "Second, the timeline alignment. Legislative actions followed by transfers within days. Not once, not twice, repeatedly." Then the third. And third, human testimony. Sworn affidavits from people inside the system who flagged irregularities and were told to stay quiet. He paused and let the room absorb it. When those three pillars line up, they don't create headlines. They create cases. The chamber was silent again, not shocked this time, but heavy with realization. Then Patel delivered the final move. He reached into the folder one last time and held up a single-page document. "Before we adjourn," he said, "I'm entering Exhibit Z into the record." The screen behind him switched to a short intake log. "Received by Los Angeles Field Office, 9:12 a.m. today," Patel read. "Digital storage devices, financial ledgers, and archived transaction files." He looked up. "That means this investigation isn't slowing down, it's accelerating." The sentence landed quietly, but it carried weight. It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, and that made it more dangerous. Waters pushed her chair back and stood. Her posture was still stiff, her chin raised, but the confidence she'd walked in with was gone. Reporters immediately shouted questions from the aisle. "Congresswoman, will you resign? Are the allegations true?" She didn't answer. She walked past the microphones, past the cameras, eyes forward, jaw tight, aides rushing to keep up. Across the table, Patel didn't react. He didn't watch her leave. He didn't speak again. He simply closed the binder, stacked the documents neatly, and gathered his materials in silence. There was no victory speech, no celebration, just a quiet exit that felt heavier than any argument. As the room slowly emptied, one truth hung in the air longer than the echo of the gavel. America didn't get answers. It got a trail. And trails don't end on camera. If you want to follow what happens next, don't look away now. This story isn't over, and the fallout is just beginning. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, turn on notifications, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think happens next?